I've been standing in throne rooms for 6 years. That's what people don't understand when they picture the job. They think diplomatic security is about fast reflexes and tactical thinking, and all the things the recruitment hollows make it look like. And sure, some of it is that. Some of it is training yourself to read a crowd in 3 seconds, to track 6 exits simultaneously, to know the difference between someone shifting their weight because their feet hurt and someone shifting their weight because they're about to do something catastrophic. But mostly it's standing still. You stand in the corner of a room that was built before your species had figured out fire, surrounded by people whose biology you barely understand, whose politics you definitely don't, and you stand there and you breathe slow and you watch. You catalog. You keep your hands loose and your face neutral and your mind running through scenarios like an engine on idle, ticking over so quietly nobody knows it's running. 6 years of that. Veltharian Prime was supposed to be another one of those days. That's what I keep coming back to every time I write this. It was supposed to be one of those nothing assignments. A ceremonial session of the High Throne, which is basically what it sounds like. The big ruling council of the Velthari Imperium sitting in their big, ridiculous golden room, deciding which of their noble families gets naming rights to an asteroid or whatever. And my job, along with a rotation of 3 other SFC-grade human guards, was to stand near the human diplomatic delegation's corner and look like we belonged there. The Velthari don't particularly like us. I should say that up front because it matters. They tolerate us the way a very old cat tolerates a puppy that got into the house by accident, with a kind of stiff, aristocratic disgust that never quite becomes aggression because that would require too much energy. We're newer than them. We're louder. We're shorter, most of us, and broader, and we don't have their bioluminescent skin markings or their 4-fingered hands or their ability to smell emotional states from across a room. We're just these weird pink-and-brown creatures who showed up 2 centuries ago with a knack for stubbornness and a truly baffling willingness to die for strangers. They don't know what to make of that last part, the dying for strangers thing. I guess they were about to find out. You want me to describe the atmosphere in the throne room before the incident? Fine, I'll try. The Sanctum Aurelius, which is what they call it, the throne room, though throne room is almost insultingly inadequate as a descriptor, is roughly the size of a terrestrial sports stadium. The ceiling is about 80 meters up, and it's made of something that isn't quite glass and isn't quite crystal, and it filters the light from Veltharian star in such a way that the entire room is bathed in this deep amber gold, like everything is suspended inside a sunset. There are columns along both sides, each one taller than most Earth buildings, and carved with inscriptions in high Velthari that record every ruling made in this room going back 12,000 years. Everything in that room is designed to make you feel small. That's the point. The architecture is a statement. It says, look how long we have existed. Look how much has happened here. You are nothing compared to this room. The ruling high throne itself, the actual seat where the Empress sits, is on a raised dais at the far end. Empress Valindra VII. She'd been on the throne for 40 years, which in Velthari terms is still fairly young. She had 2 children, a daughter, Sareth, 17 years old and already being trained in governance, and a son, Thyron, who was 9. Thyron was there that day. That's the part I keep thinking about. He was there because the session was classified as a family ceremonial, meaning the Empress wanted her children to observe, to learn what governance looked like up close. He was 9 years old and he was sitting in a small ceremonial chair to the right of his mother's throne, and he had his mother's coloring, deep violet skin markings, silver eyes, and he was very clearly trying his hardest to sit still and look serious and not fidget, the way 9-year-olds do when they've been told this is important and they want to make their mother proud. I noticed him because, well, I notice things. It's my job. And because there was something endearing about watching this small alien child with his little silver eyes go absolutely rigid with concentration every time his mother looked in his direction. And because of where he was sitting, he was in the direct line of the main ceremonial approach. The walkway that runs from the great entrance doors all the way down to the dais, right through the center of the room. I noted it automatically. Line of approach, potential vectors, cover availability. I noted it and filed it away. And then the doors opened. Here's what nobody tells you about the moment before something terrible happens. There's no dramatic music. There's no feeling of fate tapping you on the shoulder. You don't get a premonition or a vision or any of that. What you get, what I've found anyway, across 6 years of standing in rooms where things might go wrong, is a sensation like a frequency slightly out of tune. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure change. The room is still doing what it's doing, and everyone is still exactly where they are, but something in the pattern is wrong. And your brain, which has been trained to recognize patterns for years, catches it before you have conscious language for it. I caught it at 14:32:11. The sixth member of the Vreth delegation. V6, they later called him in the reports. I'll call him what he was, an assassin. He walked differently. Not dramatically differently, not something that would have jumped out at you if you weren't specifically watching for it. But I was watching for it. His weight distribution was slightly forward. The set of his shoulders was too deliberate. He wasn't looking at the Empress the way the others were. He was looking at the space between himself and the throne dais. He was calculating distance. I've seen that calculation before. You see it in people who are about to do something physical, something committed. They get this quality of internal distance, like they've already half left the room in their head, already gone to the place where the action has happened, and they're just waiting for their body to catch up. I started moving at 14:32:14. I want to be clear about why I moved the direction I moved. Because this is the part that confused people afterward, and it confused the investigation too, and I want it on record with my own words. I didn't move toward the assassin first. I moved toward Thyron. Because here's the thing about thermal compounds, and I've had training in explosive ordnance recognition. It's part of the certification package for high-value protection details. They don't care about direction. They don't care what you intended. When they go off in a sphere. And the angle of the Vreth delegation's approach, and the position of the assassin within it, and the small ceremonial chair where the Empress's 9-year-old son was sitting, all of it added up in my brain in about 3 seconds, and the answer it gave me was, he's in the radius. Thyron was in the radius. The Empress was on a raised dais behind a ceremonial blast partition, standard installation in throne rooms of this type. I'd read the architectural specs in prep work 3 days before, and her security detail would have her down and covered in under 2 seconds if something triggered. Her daughter Soreth was similarly positioned. Thyron was in the ceremonial observer's chair in the open, 6 meters from where the blast would originate, with nothing between him and it but air. I was about 15 meters away. I don't remember deciding. That's the honest truth. I don't remember having a decision to make. I just remember the room tilting as I started running, the amber light going strange at the edges, and thinking very clearly and very specifically, I have to get to the chair. I was standing approximately 12 meters to the left of the processional when the human began to move. My first reaction, I confess, was irritation. The ceremonial protocols of the high throne session are precise. Every individual present has an assigned position and an assigned role, and deviations from those positions are, well, they are not done. One does not simply begin moving in the Sanctum Aurelius during a formal session, not unless one has been given explicit leave to do so by the protocol officer. The human Rain, I later learned, was moving at significant speed. Not sprinting, not yet, but with a purposefulness that made several people near me turn to look. I heard someone to my right make a disapproving sound. I believe I was preparing to signal the protocol officer that there was an irregularity in the human detail's behavior. And then the human reached the young prince's chair. And in the same moment, the explosion occurred. I have reviewed the security timestamps since then, and they tell me the sequence was: Rain reached Thyron at 14:32:22. The device detonated at 14:32:23. 1 second. 1 single second. In my memories, it feels much larger than 1 second. Memory does that, I suppose. What I remember is the human throwing himself. That is the only word for it. Throwing between the prince and the source of the blast, wrapping his body around the child, turning so that his back and right shoulder were facing the explosion rather than the boy. I remember the sound. I remember the heat, even at my distance. I remember that several people fell. I remember the screaming. And I remember, very clearly, through the smoke and the chaos and the ringing in my ears, the sight of the human slowly rising from the floor, still holding the prince against his chest, one arm wrapped around the boy, and the child, small, violet-marked, silver-eyed, looking up at the human, with an expression I have spent weeks trying to describe accurately for this deposition. I will try again now. The prince was not crying. He was 9 years old and he had just survived a blast, and he was not crying. He was looking at this human, this creature from a species the Velthari have barely tolerated, and his expression was one of complete incomprehension. As though the child had been confronted with something that didn't fit into any category he had been given. He had been raised in the court. He knew what political maneuver looked like. He knew what ambition looked like. He had probably already been taught to identify what sycophancy looked like. He had no category for what this was. I didn't either, if I'm honest. The blast hit me in the back. I need to say something about the suit, because people keep asking about it and I want to be accurate. Standard diplomatic security armor, human compact issue, Mark VII, is rated for what the technical specs call moderate thermal and kinetic dispersal events, which sounds better than what it means, which is, it will probably not kill you immediately if something goes wrong, but it is not invincible. The blast was a Class 6 thermal. That's above moderate. That's the kind of designation that comes with a lot of caveats when you look at the protection matrix. I felt it land. I want to be clear about that. I felt it. The armor took most of it, yeah. The plates along my upper back and right shoulder absorbed what they could, but absorbed doesn't mean made it not happen. It means the physics got distributed differently. The suit deformed. My shoulder took torque. The heat that got through the seam at my collar made a mark that took about 3 weeks to finish healing. But I was up. That's what matters. The armor did its job and I was still vertical, and the boy in my arms was not injured. He was 9 years old and he was very small and he was completely rigid with shock. And when I got to my feet and assessed and registered that he was alive and uninjured, something that had been clenched inside my chest for approximately 8 seconds loosened slightly. I became aware of the room around me then. The Vreth assassin was down. Patel and Calloway had moved on him within seconds, training executing while I was on the other side of the chamber. Patel was brilliant. I need to say that in writing somewhere. She had him neutralized with a precision that would have made our instructors weep with pride. The other 11 Vreth envoys were being contained by palace security, most of them looking genuinely horrified, and I believe that horror was real, for what it's worth. I don't think the assassination attempt was a Vreth collective sanctioned operation. I think it was one individual with one agenda. The room was chaos, smoke from the blast, the amber light fractured and strange through haze, people on their feet or stumbling or frozen, court staff rushing, the security partition sealing over the dais where the Empress had been pulled down by her own guard. And then the partition lifted, about 30 seconds after the blast. The Empress rose. She was uninjured. She had been behind the blast partition and her guard had done their job, and she was standing. the gold and violet formal robes of the high throne somehow not quite diminished even in the chaos. She was standing, and her eyes were scanning the room, and I knew the precise moment she found her son, because every bit of controlled imperial stillness she was maintaining cracked open for about 2 seconds before she put it back together. Her son was alive. Her son was in the arms of a human. She started walking toward us. I didn't know what the protocol was for this. I genuinely didn't. My training covers a lot of scenarios, but you have just shielded an alien empress's child from an assassination attempt, and she is now walking toward you, and you don't know if you're allowed to be holding her son, was not in any briefing document I had ever encountered. I stood there, both feet on the floor, back straight. Thyron still held against my chest. He hadn't tried to pull away. I took that as either permission or shock and filed the distinction under deal with later. She reached us in what felt like 30 years, but was probably 15 seconds. She stopped in front of me. She was taller than I was, the Velthari are generally, and her silver eyes, the same silver as her son's, were looking at me with an intensity that I can only describe as trying to read me, actually read me, like she was looking for the subroutine that explained my behavior. I don't know what she found. I know what she said. She said in perfect compact standard, which I had not known she spoke, "You chose my son over your own safety." It wasn't quite a question. It wasn't quite a statement. It was something in between. I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Why?" And I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it. For maybe 2 seconds I stood in the smoking ruins of a ruined ceremony in a room that was mostly still in shock, and I thought about the honest answer. And then I said, he couldn't cover himself. Someone had to. People keep asking me what it was like to watch. Honest answer. I was a little too busy for the first part. Calloway and I had the assassin down by about 30 seconds post-blast, and I was still running threat assessment on the remaining Vreth delegation and coordinating with palace security on the comms when the Empress walked across the chamber toward Marcus. So I missed the first exchange. What I didn't miss was the kneeling. Because I turned around, I finished my scan, confirmed secondary threats were contained, turned around to check on Marcus, and the room was going to its knees. Not in a disorganized way, not in a panic, in this slow, deliberate spreading movement. Like everyone in that room had made the same individual decision, and they were each executing it on their own timeline. I have been part of human diplomatic missions to 7 different species in 6 years. I have watched humans be ignored and condescended to and treated as curiosities and treated as useful tools and occasionally treated with something approaching genuine respect. I have never watched anything like that. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. Marcus was standing in the middle of it, standing straight, arm erect, shoulder probably hurting a great deal more than he was showing, and he had this expression on his face that I recognized because I've served with him for 3 years and I know his face. He was completely out of his depth, not in a scared way. In a "this was not in any briefing document" way. The specific expression Marcus Rain makes when he's encountered a situation his training didn't cover, and he's rapidly trying to figure out what the appropriate response is. He looked at me. I shrugged. I genuinely didn't know either. He looked back at the Empress. He straightened his spine slightly, which was already pretty straight, and he looked her in the eye and he said, "I was close enough to hear this by then. I was just doing my job, Your Majesty." And she said, and I will never forget this, she said, "Your species has a very strange understanding of what your job is." And something in his face, not a smile, not quite, but something adjacent to one, and he said, "Yes, ma'am. We tend to think it's a bit bigger than the job description. Patient demeanor, cooperative, communicative. When asked about the incident, patient stated, and I record this verbatim because it will clearly be in 47 different reports, and I'd rather get my version accurate, I didn't really think about it. I saw a kid who couldn't cover himself. That's all. Patient requested to review security feed to confirm the prince was uninjured, before agreeing to remain in medical bay. Request was granted. Patient visibly relaxed upon visual confirmation of Prince Thyron's well-being. He then cooperated fully with treatment. Recovery timeline, estimated 6-8 days for full function. Patient was cleared for light duty at CS Day 1208. Director, I am transmitting this communiqué ahead of the formal incident report, because there are elements of the current situation on Veltharian Prime that I believe require human leadership awareness before the official documentation reaches you through standard channels. The short version, the situation following the incident has changed, in ways none of us could have predicted, and changed in our favor. That sounds cold when I write it. A man was hurt and a child nearly killed, and I'm framing it as favorable. But I need you to understand what has happened in the political landscape here in the 48 hours since. The Velthari Imperium has not had a species-wide diplomatic recalibration event in 50 years. What happened in the Sanctum Aurelius on day 1204.7 is being discussed in every level of Velthari society, from the imperial court to the lowest quarter market on the capital ring. The feed from the throne room, which leaked within 6 hours, because nothing stays contained forever, has been seen by an estimated 90% of the Velthari population. They watched a human being throw himself between a blast and their emperor's son. They watched him come up off the floor still holding the boy. They watched their empress incline her head. They watched the throne room kneel. Director, I have spent 11 years in this diplomatic post, and I have never seen the Velthari look at us the way they are looking at us now. The derogatory colloquialism they have for humans, I won't transcribe it here, but you know the one has been, according to our social monitoring feeds, essentially absent from public discourse for 40 hours. That has never happened in my tenure. The Empress has requested a private audience with SFC Reign, which is unprecedented. She has also initiated formal talks with the High Compact regarding the renegotiation of several treaty provisions that have been stalled for 18 years. The Grand Counselors, who normally take 6 months to return our communications, have responded to our last 3 messages within hours. I want to be careful not to overstate what one incident can accomplish. Political relationships are complex. Trust takes years. The Velthari are a proud people with 12,000 years of their own history, and a single act, however extraordinary, does not rewrite that. But it starts something. It started something. SFC Reign is, characteristically, completely uninterested in any of the above, and has asked me twice if his medical leave can be shortened because he doesn't like having downtime. I told him to rest his shoulder. Lyrikas, Ambassador, Human Diplomatic Mission, Veltharian Prime. They let me out of medical bay today. The shoulder is still sore. Not dramatically sore, not the kind of sore where you make sounds about it, just that constant background awareness that something was done to that part of your body, and it's still working through the paperwork. The hearing in my right ear is about 80%, which the doctor says will get to 100 in a couple more days. I spent the morning doing light inventory, normal stuff, armor assessment, equipment checks. Calloway came by and didn't say anything profound, just made me coffee the way I like it and sat across the table and drank his own, and we talked about the footage we'd been sent from home, some sports results, some family messages. And it was one of those mornings that feels specifically valuable because it's exactly like all the other mornings. Ambassador Koss told me about the private audience request from the Empress. I told her I'd do whatever the mission required. She gave me a look that said she knew that was a deflection, and then told me the audience was scheduled for day 1211. 3 days. I don't really know what to do with the idea of a private audience with an empress. My background is not exactly that. I grew up in a medium-sized city on the coast of a continent that is not known for producing particularly aristocratic people. My mother was a structural engineer. My father drove cargo transport. I joined the service because I believed in it, not because I had any particular political destiny in mind. And now I'm going to sit across from the most powerful person on a planet with 12,000 years of imperial history. I'm going to sit there because I saw a kid in the blast radius. That's what it keeps coming back to. Every time I try to understand the size of what apparently happened, the kneeling, the feed being everywhere, Ambassador Kaas's communique implications that I accidentally reshuffled the diplomatic deck. Every time I try to hold that in my head, I come back to the same small image. A 9-year-old in a ceremonial chair who was too small to cover himself. Everything else is just everything else. The private audience chamber is called the Sanctum Interiorum. It's nothing like the throne room. It's small by imperial standards, maybe 15 meters across. Warm, amber light again, but softer. There are actual plants in it, real ones, something with long silver leaves that moved slightly in climate-controlled air. I noticed them because I hadn't seen real plants indoors on this planet yet, and there was a moment of pure simple pleasure at the sight of a thing just growing. I was shown in by a protocol officer, and the Empress was already seated. I did the formal greeting the way Kaas had briefed me, the hand position, the slight incline of the head, not as deep as a full bow, that specific measured gesture that signals respect between parties rather than supplication before authority. I'd practiced it for about an hour the night before. She watched me do it, then she said in compact standard, "You practiced." I said, "Is it that obvious?" She said, "It is precise. Precision suggests practice, but it was correctly done." A pause, "Sit." I sat. There was a low table between us. Something on it, the carved object the palace staff had brought to the medical bay, plus what appeared to be a document. The Empress looked at me with those silver eyes and she wasn't performing anything. That's what I noticed. The room had no audience. She wasn't being the Empress for anyone right now. She was just a person, sitting across a table. She said, "My son speaks of you." I said, "I hope favorably." She said, "He said you smelled like burning and metal and something he cannot name. He thinks it might be what humans smell like when they have decided something." I didn't have a response to that. She said, "He is 9 years old and he is already trying to understand what it means that you are what you are. I think that is valuable. I think it may be more valuable than 12 years of court education." She paused. "That is not something I would say in open session. I am saying it to you because I think you deserve to know what your action produced in him." I said, "What did it produce?" She said, "Questions about whether the way we have categorized other species for centuries is accurate, about whether species worth is a real thing, or whether it is merely a very old, very comfortable assumption." She looked at the silver-leafed plants for a moment. 9-year-olds are efficient questioners. They have not yet learned to be polite about what they find inconsistent. I said, "That's true." She said, "Will you accept something?" She reached to the document on the table and slid it across to me. It was dense with high Velthari script that I can't read, but there was a seal on it, the imperial seal of the Velthari throne, which I recognized from the prep briefings. She said, "This is the Valendrath recognition. It is granted in my name to individuals who have performed an act of." She paused, and the interpreter started to move, and she held up a hand that stopped him, "Thalkesher." There is no exact translation. Closest rendering, an act of preservation that required the actor to substitute their own continuity for another's without condition. It has been granted 41 times in 12,000 years of imperial record. No non-Velthari has ever received it. I looked at the document, then at her. I said, "Your Majesty, I need to say something and I need you to hear it the right way." She said, "Speak." I said, "I don't want to be honored for that. I'm not being modest. It's not about modesty. It's that if I accept an honor for it, it becomes a thing I did to receive an honor. And it wasn't that. It was just he needed covering. That's all it was. I don't want the thing I did to become complicated by what comes after." Silence. The Empress looked at me for a very long time. Then she said, softly, "Do you know why that answer makes you exactly the right person to receive this?" I didn't answer. She said, "Because you are trying to protect the purity of the act by refusing its recognition. You are still, even now, covering something. You are covering the act itself." She slid the document a few centimeters closer to me. "Receive it, not for yourself. Receive it so that Thyron can grow up knowing that the highest recognition the Velthari Imperium can offer was given to a human being who thought only of a child's safety. Let him grow up knowing that. Let my court grow up knowing that. Let the next 12,000 years have that in their record." I looked at the document. I thought about a 9-year-old in a ceremonial chair, trying to sit very straight to make his mother proud. I picked up the document. "I want to say something about the human. His name is Marcus. I know because I asked. Mother said I could ask, and so I did. I want to say that when the loud thing happened, I was scared. I am putting that in the record because I think it is true, and I think true things should be in records even when they are uncomfortable. I was scared. It was very loud and very bright and very hot, and I did not know what to do. And then he was there. I did not see him come. He was just suddenly there, and then he was around me like a shell, and everything loud and hot was on the outside. And I could feel that the loud and hot things were reaching him. I could tell it was happening, and he did not make a sound. He did not move away from it. He held me in. I have thought about this many times since that day. I have thought about why he did it. Mother says he was doing his job. Mother also says his understanding of his job is very strange. I think maybe both are true. Maybe he had a job and the job said to protect the diplomatic mission, and he looked at the room and decided I was part of what needed protecting. Even though I am not human, even though I am not part of his mission, even though I am from a people that has not always been, I know this word kind, to his kind. He protected me anyway. I am 9 years old and I am going to be emperor one day. Mother says not for a very long time, and I hope she is right. And I think when that day comes, I would like to remember this. I would like to remember that a person from a species we thought was lesser than us ran across a room so that I would not be hurt. I would like to be the kind of emperor who knows that. I would like our imperium to be the kind of imperium that knows what Marcus Rain taught us in that room. He smelled like burning and metal, and something I could not name. I think the thing I could not name was the smell of a decision made faster than thinking. I think that might be what courage smells like when it is real. I want that in the record. Prince Thyron Valindra VII, age 9. Anchor Felith Saul, RIMWARD Press Collective. For viewers who are only now encountering this story, and I understand that many of our outer system subscribers are receiving this several signal days delayed, I want to walk through what the verified feed documentation shows. On Compact Standard Day 1204.7, during a formal session of the Velthari High Throne, a Vreth national acting as part of a diplomatic delegation produced a concealed Class 6 thermal device and initiated detonation. In the seconds before the detonation, Human Security Officer SFC Marcus Rain identified the threat, calculated the blast radius, and determined that the youngest child of the Velthari Empress was in the direct danger zone. He covered the child with his body. He sustained injuries. The child was not harmed. We have run this sequence of events through our editorial team multiple times, because frankly, and I say this as someone who covers galactic news for a living and is accustomed to remarkable things happening, this is remarkable. The Velthari Imperium has, for most of the 2-century history of human Velthari contact, maintained what diplomatic historians characterize as polite contempt for the human species. They consider humans young, impulsive, and a word that translates approximately as temporary, as in, a passing phase in the longer story of the galaxy. What happened in the Sanctum Aurelius has complicated that story considerably. The Empress granted SFC Reign the Valendrath recognition. This is the first time in the recorded history of the Imperium that a non-Velthari individual has received it. To put that in perspective, this recognition has been given 41 times in 12,000 years. The prior recipient list includes 3 figures who are worshipped as secular saints in Velthari cultural practice. SFC Reign is the 42nd. I spoke with human diplomatic correspondent Priya Nasir earlier today, and she made a point I think is worth sharing with our viewers. She said, "The remarkable thing isn't that a human acted heroically. Humans act heroically all the time in all kinds of contexts. The remarkable thing is that it happened here, in this room, in front of these people, in a way that couldn't be dismissed or explained away or filtered through a century of prejudgment. It was too direct, too fast, too human. And they all saw it." The footage has been viewed approximately 4.2 billion times across galactic networks as of this broadcast. We will continue coverage as diplomatic developments unfold. This has been the Rimward Press Collective Special Report. Assessment of Incident Outcome. The assassination operation failed at objective level. Target Empress Valindra was not struck. Secondary tactical damage to the Velthari session was minimal. Unintended consequence assessment, significant. A human security officer's intervention has produced a diplomatic and cultural ripple effect that our analysts assess as exceeding anything we could have deliberately engineered through conventional means. The Velthari-human relationship, which our strategic models predicted would remain adversarial for an estimated 30-80 more years, appears to have been substantially reconfigured. Recommendation: reassess all predictive models that treat human behavior as variable stable. Models assume humans will perform rational self-interested action in approximately 85% of scenarios. This incident falls outside that probability bracket. The human did not perform rational self-interested action. All our models for predicting interspecies political dynamics assume species act in their own interest or in the interest of clearly defined relationships, treaty partners, allied species, biological kin. The human acted for a child he had no relationship with, from a species that does not respect his own, at personal risk, without hesitation. We do not have a model for this. We are building one. We anticipate it will be unsettling. I've been thinking about what to write here. It's been a few weeks. The shoulder is fine. The hearing is back. Life has more or less returned to what it was, except that it hasn't quite, and I think I have to be honest about that. Things are different now. Not for me exactly. My days are still the same basic architecture of standing and watching and filing reports, but the air in the mission is different. The way the palace staff look at me when I pass them. The way the Velthari diplomatic attachés who come to our mission for meetings actually meet my eyes now, actually acknowledge me as a person in the room. I got a message from home. My mother. She said she saw something on the network about something that happened and was that me and was I all right. I told her I was all right. I didn't explain the rest because the rest would take too long, and also because I don't think I fully understand the rest yet. She sent back, "I always said you were going to do something big. I just thought it would be with the structural analysis career you kept threatening to pursue instead of the service. That made me laugh, which I needed. I've been thinking about what the prince wrote, the statement they included in the official record. They sent me a copy, which I was not expecting, and which made me sit down for a moment when I read it. He wrote that he thinks courage smells like a decision made faster than thinking. I've been turning that over in my head for days. Because here's the thing about that. He's right, except I'm not sure it's exactly courage. Or I'm not sure courage is exactly one thing. What happened in that room, the thing that made me move before the alarms went off and before the scanner caught the chemical signature, and before anyone had officially identified what was happening, that wasn't bravery as an act of will. I didn't choose to be brave. I didn't make a sacrifice. I just ran toward the kid. And I think what the Velthari are having trouble parsing is not the heroism. It's the automaticity, that a person from a species they've spent 200 years considering lesser would not pause, would not perform the calculation, would not factor in the political weight of whose son it was, or the diplomatic complexity, or the personal risk index. Would just run. I wonder sometimes if that's specifically human, or if it's specifically me, or if there's a difference. If being human shaped me into someone for whom the only available response to a child in a blast radius is forward motion, or if I'm just built this way and the human part is coincidental. I think about what the Empress said, that I was trying to protect the purity of the act by refusing recognition, that I was covering the act itself, that covering things is what I do. Maybe I just think things should be shielded when they can't shield themselves. Kids, acts that deserve to stay clean, whatever. The work is the same. Tomorrow I'll be standing in a room somewhere, watching exits, tracking variables, running the background engine that makes sure people get to be safe. That's what the job is. That's what it's always been. The room kneeling is a separate thing, a remarkable thing. A thing I'll carry with me for the rest of my career, I expect. But it doesn't change what the work is. The work is, someone might be in the blast radius. The work is, get there first. That's it, that's always been it. Everything else is just what happens after. This file was designated for preservation under the Human Compact Historical Significance Act and the Velthari Imperial Records Preservation Accord, one of the first jointly filed preservation designations in the history of both species' archival systems. In the months following the Sanctum incident, the following developments were recorded. The Velthari Human Compact diplomatic renegotiations, stalled for 18 years, were concluded within 4 months. Humanity received expanded resource agreements, a permanent observer position on the Velthari High Council for the first time in the relationship's history, and formal species-to-species recognition as a peer civilization under the Velthari classification system, removing, after 200 years, the probationary designation the Velthari had maintained since first contact. 3 Velthari universities, within the year following the incident, added courses studying human history and cultural development. Prior to the incident, 0 such courses existed. Prince Thiron Vailindra VII, in the years following, as documented by subsequent archival entries, maintained an ongoing correspondence with SFC Marcus Reign. The content of that correspondence is held under a separate classification. What is on public record is that the correspondence continued for over 20 years, and that when Prince Thiron eventually ascended to the imperial throne as Emperor Thiron I, one of his first ceremonial acts was to reinstate open diplomatic channels with the Human Compact following a period of political complication in the 4390s. He cited in his ceremonial address a memory from childhood. He said someone was in the blast radius, someone ran. SFC Marcus Odell Reign was promoted twice in the years following the incident. He retired from the 14th Human Diplomatic Security Attachment at the rank of Sergeant Major, having served 22 years total. He returned to the coastal city he grew up in. He did eventually pursue structural engineering, a second career certification that he completed at age 47. He designed several buildings, all of which are, by available accounts, very solid. His mother was proud. The Valendrath recognition, awarded to SFC Rain, is housed in the Velthari Imperial Museum of Historical Record, in a gallery that was added specifically to commemorate the Sanctum incident. It is displayed alongside the original security feed timestamps, the Prince's dictated statement, and a single piece of SFC Rain's Mark VII armor. The right shoulder plate, damaged to 74%, which he donated to the archive with the note, "It did its job." The gallery title in High Velthari translates approximately to "The Room That Learned to Kneel." In the 7 years since the gallery's opening, it has been visited by more individuals than any other exhibit in the Museum of Historical Record. The most common entry in the visitor log, regardless of species, is some variation of the same thing. A single line. "He just ran. They asked me to say something." For the anniversary, there's an event apparently, the museum, some diplomatic ceremony. The Empress sent a personal communication. Vailindra is still on the throne, remarkable woman, 40+ years, and still carrying it with that quality of absolute presence she has. She asked if I would attend. She said Thyron would be there. Thyron is 29 now. I keep trying to line that up with the 9-year-old I carry in my memory, and it doesn't quite work. My brain wants to keep him small. The kid with the silver eyes going rigid with concentration, because he wanted his mother to be proud of him. I'll go. I'll figure out what to say. I suspect what I'll say will be some version of the same thing I always say when people ask me about it, which is that I'm not sure there's anything particularly complex to explain. A child was in the path of something that would hurt him. I was not. That's the whole equation. That's the arithmetic that ran in my head in about 3 seconds and produced the only answer that made any sense. The fact that the child happened to be Velthari, and I happened to be human, and we happened to be two species who had spent 2 centuries regarding each other across a large wall of mutual suspicion, that's context. Important context, historically. But in the moment in the room in the 3 seconds, it was just child blast path. I think sometimes that might be what humans are. Not the fastest, not the most advanced, not the oldest or the wisest or the most diplomatically sophisticated, but the species that, when the math simplifies all the way down, the answer that comes out is run toward the thing that needs covering. I don't know if that's what we were designed for. I don't know if any of us were designed for anything. But I've spent 20 years watching humans, in a dozen different contexts across a dozen different worlds, and that's what we do. When it gets simple enough, when all the politics and the calculations and the species-level considerations fall away, and it comes down to the basic data point, someone can't cover themselves, we run. Maybe that's small. Maybe that's everything. I have a scar on my right shoulder. It's faded, but it's there. My daughter has asked about it approximately 17 times since she was old enough to ask questions, and I have given her approximately 17 slightly different versions of the same answer, which is, someone needed covering. I was close. She told me last week, she's 11, she has her mother's stubbornness and my habit of thinking out loud, she said. Dad, that's not a complete explanation. And I said, no, but it's a complete answer. She thought about that. She's 11, so she thought about it with her whole face, which I love. Then she said, okay, but also were you scared? I said a little after. She said, but not during. I said, not during. She said, why not? And I thought about it, the amber room, the way the light fractured through smoke, the 9-year-old boy in the blast radius, the only direction that made sense. I said, because during there wasn't time to be scared. During there was just the running. She nodded like that made sense. It does, I think. It does make sense. 20 years later, in a coastal city, in a house made of very solid walls, with a scar that's mostly just a texture now, and a daughter who asks good questions, and a galaxy that's maybe, slowly, slightly different because of one morning in an amber room. 20 years later, I would run again. The arithmetic would be the same. Someone can't cover themselves. I can. Run.